The Galactic Academic Exchange Program was, officially, a bold initiative to foster interspecies understanding, cultural appreciation, and the free flow of knowledge across 17 star systems. Unofficially, it was a lot of PowerPoint presentations in zero gravity, and nobody had figured out how to make the chairs comfortable for species with an odd number of limbs. Cadet Dex Malloy had signed up for one reason. The brochure said, and he was quoting directly here, "All meal credits included." That was it. That was his entire motivation for representing humanity aboard the Vethara Station Academy, floating somewhere between the Kessler Nebula and a scheduling conflict. Dex was not what you would call an ambassador. He was 23, perpetually underdressed, and had the resting energy of someone who had already decided that whatever was about to happen was probably fine. His backpack had a broken zipper. He had not fixed it. His assigned seat put him next to Prix, a Soluvian cadet who communicated partially through color shifts in his translucent skin, and who had, upon first meeting Dex, turned a deep and worried shade of amber. Prix had done his research on humans. He was not sure how he felt about any of it. At the front of the classroom, Professor Venn arranged 7 limbs into what passed, in his culture, as a confident academic stance. He had 40 years of teaching. He was prepared for everything. He was not prepared for Dex Malloy. Professor Venn clicked the holographic display to life with 2 of his 7 limbs, using a third to dim the lights and a fourth to pull up his notes. Because when you have 7 limbs, you use them, and anyone who does not is simply not organized. "Today," he announced, in the clipped formal tone of someone who had rehearsed this opening, "we examine a planet classified by the Galactic Survey Bureau as a Class 4 hostile environment. A world of extreme atmospheric pressure zones, violent tectonic activity, and oceans that cover 71% of its surface." He paused for effect. "That planet is Earth, the home world of your human classmate." Every alien head in the room swiveled toward Dex. Dex was rearranging the broken zipper pull on his backpack, trying to get it to stay. He did not look up. Professor Venn pressed on. The first image materialized in the center of the room, a hovering, glowing hologram of a creature from Earth's deep ocean. It had a luminescent lure dangling from its forehead, a mouthful of teeth that pointed in directions teeth had no business pointing, and eyes that had long since given up on the concept of seeing because light did not exist where this thing lived, and it had made its peace with that. The class went quiet. A cadet from the Delvari system made a sound like a kettle releasing pressure. "This," said Professor Venn, "is the anglerfish. It inhabits depths of your ocean where the pressure alone would crush most known life forms. It hunts in complete darkness. It is, by any reasonable biological metric, a nightmare." Prix had shifted to a pale, sickly green. He leaned toward Dex. "That lives on your planet," he whispered. It was not a question. It was the beginning of a crisis. Dex had gotten the zipper pull to a 45-degree angle. Progress. The next hologram appeared. A barrel-shaped creature, transparent as glass, with a head that rotated a full 360 degrees to track prey. The barrel-eye fish. Several students shifted in their seats. One filed a preliminary discomfort report with the station's student wellness system directly from their neural interface, because why wait? Then came the bobbit worm. 6 feet long, living buried in the sand, lunging upward to snatch prey with a strike faster than most species could register visually. The Delvari cadet made the kettle sound again. Prix had moved through green and was now a color that did not have a name in most languages, but roughly translated to, "I should have taken the semester abroad on a nice dry moon somewhere." Professor Venn let the silence breathe. This was, technically, the build-up. He had one more slide. The slide. He had saved it specifically because in 37 years of teaching xenobiology and planetary threat assessment, it had never failed to produce the desired effect, which was complete and total existential horror, followed by a productive class discussion about why humans were to be approached with great caution and a generous buffer zone. He clicked to the final image. The hologram that materialized in the center of the classroom was, by any measure, a lot. It was approximately the size of a school bus, if a school bus had decided to become a predator and had been very committed to the bit. It had serrated fins running the length of its body, like nature had gotten ambitious. It had approximately 300 teeth arranged in multiple rotating rows, because one row of teeth is for species that are not trying hard enough. Its eyes were flat, black, and ancient-looking, carrying the specific expression of something that had been at the top of its food chain for so long that the concept of fear was not even a distant memory, but simply a thing that happened to other creatures elsewhere, and was frankly their problem. The Greenland shark, 450 years old, possibly older, swimming slowly through water so cold and dark that most life forms would simply stop working. It did not stop working. It had not stopped working since before most of the civilizations in this classroom had discovered agriculture. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then, the Delvery cadet stood up. Just stood up, said nothing, and sat back down. Because sometimes, that is all you can do. A cadet from the Mervathi collective quietly contacted their family. Not for any specific reason, just to check in. Pricks had stopped changing colors entirely, which, for a Soluvian, was the biological equivalent of buffering. He was simply a fixed, translucent, vaguely horrified shape in a chair. Professor Venn let the image hang in the air. He clasped two of his limbs behind his back, in the universal academic gesture of controlled satisfaction. This creature, he said, his voice carrying the weight of a man delivering a verdict, has survived 5 mass extinction events. It reaches maturity at 150 years of age. It moves through the deepest, most inhospitable regions of Earth's ocean with complete impunity. It is, by the assessment of the Galactic Survey Bureau, one of the most formidably durable life forms ever catalogued on any Class 4 world. He paused. Are there any questions before we discuss why this makes human space exploration such a statistically remarkable development? From the back of the classroom, there was a sound. It was a yawn. A genuine, unhurried, jaw-stretching yawn, followed by the soft click of a backpack zipper that had finally been coaxed into a workable position. Dex Malloy looked up at the hologram for the first time. He tilted his head. He squinted slightly, the way a person does when they are looking at something familiar in an unfamiliar context, like seeing your dentist at a grocery store. Oh, he said, Greenland shark. A short pause. We eat those. The room did not react immediately. This was because the room needed a moment to process the sentence it had just heard, run it through several layers of translation software, confirm that the translation was accurate, and then experience the resulting emotion, which did not have a clean name in most languages, but was somewhere in the overlap between disbelief, personal offense, and the specific feeling of realizing that the universe is larger and stranger than you had previously budgeted for. Pricks unfroze. He turned to Dex very slowly. You eat those, he repeated. Well, Dex gestured loosely at the hologram. Not like regularly. It has to be prepared a specific way, because the meat is toxic if you do it wrong. But yeah, it's a delicacy in Iceland. He paused. They bury it in the ground for a few months first. Pricks stared at him. The fermentation process, Dex added helpfully, takes the ammonia content down to a manageable level. Pricks filed his first emotional support request of the semester. Professor Venn did not shed limbs often. It was an involuntary stress response, common in his species, and considered somewhat embarrassing in professional settings, the way humans might flush red or develop a nervous tic. He had not done it in 11 years. He was very proud of that record. The record ended. Limb number 6 detached itself from his torso with a soft, biological pop and drifted gently to the floor of the classroom, where it continued moving slightly, because nature is relentless, even in its inconvenient moments. You, said Professor Venn, pointing 3 of his remaining limbs at Dex in a way that was probably not in the faculty conduct guidelines, buried it. For a few months, yeah, Dex nodded. Some people say 6. My uncle swears by 4, but he is also wrong about a lot of things, so... The Delvery cadet had stopped making the kettle sound and graduated to complete silence, which was somehow worse. They were staring at the hologram of the Greenland shark with the expression of someone who had just learned that a thing they had categorized as an apex predator in a hostile environment had, in fact, been categorized by at least one human as a project. Pricks had moved his chair approximately 4 inches away from Dex. Unconsciously, he looked down, noticed what he had done, and then decided not to move it back, because some instincts exist for a reason. Okay, but to be fair, said Dex, because he had clearly read the room and chosen to continue anyway, it tastes pretty bad, even after the burying. It smells like ammonia, and the texture is, I'm not going to lie, a lot. He made a face that indicated genuine, mild culinary disappointment. It's more of an experience than a meal, like you do it because it's traditional, and because someone dares you. Someone dares you, Prix repeated, in a voice so flat it had achieved a kind of zen quality. Usually, and then you eat a 400-year-old toxic predator. Fermented, Dex corrected. There's a difference. There was, apparently, not enough of a difference for Prix, who turned a color that the Soluvian emotional spectrum cataloged under a fundamental reassessment of my assumptions about the galaxy. A cadet from the Hevrathi Union raised a small, delicate appendage. Is it, they began carefully, the only large ocean predator your species consumes? Dex laughed. It was a short, easy laugh, the laugh of a man who found the question genuinely charming in its innocence. No, he said. The Hevrathi cadet lowered their appendage with the slow energy of someone who had asked a question and immediately regretted the answer. Professor Venn retrieved his limb from the floor, reattached it with practiced efficiency, and stood for a moment with his eyes closed. In 40 years of teaching, he had covered supernovae, parasitic civilizations, the 17 known varieties of black hole radiation, and a semester-long module on the time an entire planet had accidentally declared war on a weather system. He had taught all of it, with composure. He looked at Dex Malloy, 23 years old, broken backpack zipper, now fixed, expression somewhere between relaxed and mildly entertained. Professor Venn opened his notes for part 2 of the lesson. He closed them again. We will, he said carefully, be revisiting the curriculum. Professor Venn was not a man who admitted defeat. He was, however, a man who could recognize when a lesson plan had been professionally humiliated and who understood that the only path forward was through. He pulled up the Galactic Survey Bureau's full planetary file on Earth, all 412 pages of it, cross-referenced with the Xenobiological Threat Index, the Hostile Environment Registry, and a supplementary document that some anonymous bureau analyst had simply titled Concerning. He shared it to the classroom display with the energy of someone filing a formal complaint with the universe. Let us, he said, in a voice that had moved past composure and into something more like controlled archaeological excavation, examine the full picture. The first follow-up fact appeared on the screen. Humans had a documented history of hunting the blue whale, the largest animal known to exist on any catalogued world. A creature so large that its heart was the size of a small vehicle, and its arteries wide enough for a juvenile of several species to swim through comfortably. Humans had, for a significant portion of their history, decided that this was a reasonable thing to pursue in small wooden boats, with handheld implements, in open ocean, and had done so with enough consistency to nearly drive the species to extinction. The classroom absorbed this. They won, said the Delvari cadet slowly, parsing the data, against the largest animal on the planet. Repeatedly, said Professor Venn, in the tone of a man reading from a medical chart that keeps getting worse. Dex leaned back in his chair. The harpoon technology was actually pretty clever, he offered. Early versions were just sharpened sticks, though. Took a while to develop. Prix turned to stare at him. Sharpened sticks, he said. We were working with what we had. Professor Venn moved to the next entry before anyone could fully process the previous one, because momentum was the only thing holding this lesson together. Humans, the file noted, had also developed a practice of hunting a creature called the sperm whale, which, in addition to being enormous, possessed the largest brain of any known Earth animal, was capable of producing a biosonar click loud enough to stun or kill prey, and could dive to depths of over 2,000 meters. They had hunted it for the oil inside its skull, which they used for, among other things, lamp fuel and industrial lubrication. They went into the deep ocean, said the Hevrathi cadet, reading carefully, in wooden boats, to extract oil from inside the head of a 2,000-meter diving animal that can produce a sound capable of stunning living creatures. For lamp fuel, added Professor Venn, because context was important. We didn't have electricity yet, said Dex. It made sense at the time. It absolutely did not, said Prix. Dex shrugged in the specific way of someone who is not going to argue with that. Professor Venn scrolled forward. Because the file had more, the file always had more. The file was, he was beginning to understand, essentially bottomless. Next entry. Humans had a documented recreational activity called cage diving, in which a participant would voluntarily enter a small metal enclosure, lower themselves into open ocean water, and position themselves in direct proximity to the great white shark, a predator that had remained biologically unchanged for millions of years, for the purpose of, and the Bureau file used this word directly, enjoyment. The room went quiet in a different way than before. It was the quiet of a group of intelligent beings collectively encountering a concept their frameworks were not equipped to process. "They do it for fun," said the Delvari cadet, not really asking, just saying the words out loud to see if they became more logical when spoken. "Some of them pay a significant amount of money to do it," said Professor Venn, reading from the file with the flat delivery of someone who had stopped being surprised and moved into a kind of numb academic acceptance. "It is a popular tourism industry." Prix looked at Dex. "You pay to be near the shark." "I personally have not done it," said Dex, "but it's on my list." Prix shifted to the color that Soluvian biologists had originally classified as a theoretical extreme, appearing only under conditions of profound psychological stress, and had since quietly renamed the Dex Malloy response. Though that paperwork had not fully processed yet, Professor Venn, pressing forward with the grim determination of a man who had come this far and was going to finish, pulled up the next entry. Humans had a documented culinary tradition involving a creature called the mantis shrimp, a small animal, visually striking, which possessed the ability to strike with the force of a bullet, accelerating its appendage at speeds comparable to a .22 caliber round, generating cavitation bubbles that produced a secondary shockwave upon impact. It could break aquarium glass. It could break fingers. It processed color through 16 photoreceptor types, compared to the 3 possessed by most humans, meaning it experienced a visual spectrum so far beyond human perception that scientists had spent years trying, and largely failing, to fully conceptualize it. Humans had decided it was delicious. "They eat it," said Professor Venn. "They eat it," confirmed Dex. "The thing that hits like a bullet. You crack the shell, and the tail meat just..." Dex made a small appreciative gesture. "It's really good, actually. A little sweet. Pairs well with garlic butter." Professor Venn set down his notes, picked them up again, set them down once more, and then simply stood with his hands, all 7 limbs, hanging at his sides. He looked at the class. He looked at Dex. He looked back at the class. "The Bureau," he said, after a long moment, "classifies Earth as a Class 4 hostile environment. The classification exists to indicate a planet whose conditions are sufficiently extreme as to be incompatible with the survival of most known life forms." He paused. "I would like to formally submit a recommendation that we revisit the classification system, because I am no longer certain that Earth is hostile to humans." Another pause, longer this time. "I am beginning to suspect it is the other way around." Dex looked up from his backpack. "That's honestly a really nice thing to say," he said. "Thank you, Professor." Professor Venn did not feel that it had been intended as a compliment. He shed another limb. The class was supposed to end at the 3rd chime of the station's time bell. It did not end at the 3rd chime of the station's time bell. It ended approximately 22 minutes later, after Professor Venn had attempted to restore some academic order, failed, attempted again, failed more completely, and then simply stood at the front of the room in the specific silence of a man who had looked directly into the abyss and found the abyss eating fermented shark with garlic butter. The file on Earth was still open on the display behind him. Nobody had asked him to close it. Nobody wanted to look at it anymore, but nobody wanted it closed either, in the way that you cannot stop looking at something that has fundamentally restructured your understanding of what a planet is allowed to be. Prix submitted his emotional support request at 4:17 in the afternoon, station time. He filled out the reason field with careful, deliberate honesty. He wrote, "My assigned human classmate has, in the span of a single academic session, caused me to reconsider every assumption I held about the relationship between a species and its environment, the definition of the word edible, and my own personal feelings about the ocean, which I had previously found peaceful and am now reconsidering entirely. The student wellness system..." which had been designed to handle homesickness, academic pressure, and the occasional existential crisis related to deep space displacement, flagged his submission as a new category and automatically forwarded it to the system administrator with a note that said, simply, "Please advise." The Delvari cadet left the classroom without speaking, not dramatically, not in a huff. They simply gathered their materials with slow, methodical movements, the way a person does when they are operating on a processing delay, and walked out with the careful energy of someone who needed to sit somewhere quiet and think about what a harpoon was for a while. The HFY cadet remained in their seat for several minutes after the session technically ended, scrolling back through the Earth file on their personal display, pausing at various entries with expressions that cycled through disbelief, reluctant fascination, and a growing, complicated respect that they were not entirely comfortable with yet. They paused longest on the entry about free solo ocean swimming, a human recreational activity involving no vessel, no protective equipment, and no apparent concern, in open water of indeterminate depth, sometimes at night. They read it 3 times. They did not submit an emotional support request. They simply added Earth to a private list they kept titled, "Places to Never Visit, but to Think About Often." Professor Venn dismissed the class with a wave of 2 limbs, which was a subdued gesture for him. He usually used 4 for dismissal. It was, in academic body language, the equivalent of a man seeing students to the door while privately sitting down on the floor and staring at the ceiling. He stayed behind after everyone filed out. He pulled the Earth file back up on the main display, alone in the empty classroom, and scrolled through it with the methodical focus of someone doing research, except the research was less about learning and more about confirmation. He needed to confirm, in the privacy of an empty room, that what he had just experienced was real, documented, and not in some way a very elaborate joke that the human cadet had orchestrated specifically to destabilize him. It was real. It was all documented. Every entry was sourced, cross-referenced, and verified by no fewer than 3 bureau analysts, 2 of whom had included personal footnotes that read, in various diplomatic phrasings, as versions of the same sentiment, which was that they had not expected the data to look like this, and that they were fine, but that they had needed a few days after completing the report. Professor Venn read about the box jellyfish, which was nearly transparent, tentacles nearly invisible in open water, carrying enough venom to kill a human within minutes, and which humans had, in several coastal regions, simply accepted as a seasonal feature of their swimming beaches, the way other species might accept weather. He read about the saltwater crocodile, which had survived the extinction event that erased the dinosaurs, could hold its breath for over an hour, and had a bite force that exceeded that of any living terrestrial animal on record. Humans had, historically, shared river systems with this creature, built settlements near it, occasionally lost members of their population to it, and continued anyway, because the river was useful, and they had decided that was that. He read about the stonefish, the most venomous fish in the known ocean, which camouflaged itself as a rock on the ocean floor, and which humans had, in response, developed specific shoes for, and had then continued wading into the ocean while wearing those shoes, undeterred, because the ocean was where they wanted to be, and a venomous camouflaged rock was an obstacle, not a deterrent. He closed the file. He opened it again. He read the entry about freediving. Humans descending to depths of 300 meters on a single breath. No equipment, no oxygen supply, relying on a physiological reflex called the mammalian dive response, which slowed their heart rate and redistributed blood flow to their core organs, a reflex that humans shared with marine mammals, and which humans had apparently decided to use recreationally, competitively, and sometimes in pursuit of a personal best time, which they would then post about on their global communication network for social validation. Professor Venn closed the file, gathered his remaining 6 limbs, collected the 7th from the floor where it had come to rest against a chair leg, reattached it, picked up his notes, put them down, and walked to the door of the classroom. He stopped. He turned back. He looked at the blank display where the file had been, and then at the empty chair in the back row where Dex Malloy had spent the entire session fixing a broken zipper, half asleep, occasionally helpful in the most destabilizing way possible. Professor Venn had, in his 40 years of teaching, given out 11 commendations, It was a significant gesture in the Academy's academic culture, reserved for students who demonstrated exceptional contribution to the educational environment of a session. He had given them to cadets who delivered brilliant presentations, who asked questions that elevated the discourse, who contributed original research or novel perspectives that changed the direction of a class in a meaningful way. He pulled out his commendation form. He filled it out for Dex Malloy. The reason field asked him to specify the nature of the exceptional contribution. He thought about it for a long moment, standing alone in the empty classroom, the station humming quietly around him. Then he wrote, "Cadet Malloy fundamentally altered the pedagogical framework of this session by demonstrating, through casual and entirely unsolicited personal testimony, that the classification criteria currently used by the Galactic Survey Bureau to assess planetary threat levels are, in at least one significant case, oriented in the incorrect direction. The educational impact was immediate, comprehensive, and will likely require several follow-up sessions to fully process. Contribution was, technically, exceptional. Commendation is warranted. I am fine." The last two sentences were not standard commendation language. He submitted it anyway. Dex Malloy received the commendation notification at 6:43 in the evening, station time, while eating dinner in the Academy cafeteria. He read it once, nodded in the slow, unbothered way of a man who found the universe's responses to him mildly amusing but not surprising, and set his communicator down. Prix, sitting across from him with a bowl of something warm and carefully non-threatening, looked up. "What was that?" "Commendation," said Dex. Prix stared at him. "For today?" "Yep. You fixed your backpack zipper and told the class, we eat prehistoric sharks." "Fermented prehistoric sharks," said Dex. "Technically." Prix was quiet for a moment. He shifted through two colors slowly, like a sigh expressed in light. Then, he looked at his bowl, looked at Dex, and said, with the careful tone of someone who had decided that understanding was no longer the goal and coexistence was probably enough, "Is there anything on this station's menu that your species has also hunted and processed into a traditional dish?" Dex looked at the cafeteria menu board thoughtfully. "Give me a minute," he said. Prix immediately flagged his emotional support request for a follow-up appointment.